Hey everyone, welcome to UJug. The first thing I want to do is see how everyone is doing today and where they're watching this from. So in the chat, I'd like everyone to say on a 1 to 10 how good you're feeling today, and then also what location you are watching from in the chat window. I'm offering 0 prizes for this. There's no quid pro quo at all. So I've got a 9 and a home. I mean, I don't. Yes, Utah. Tell me what part of the world you're you're logging in from. Let me bring up our slides here. Just so let me introduce who's in our other tabs here. We've got our presenter Jake in the center there, and then our sponsor for this meeting, Ari from JFrog, and so we'll get to them in a short moment. So let me share this Chrome tab, share. All right. All right, so there's our logo. Let's go to our sponsors here. So here's our sponsors page. Applitools and Overstock just joined, so that's exciting. Applitools has a lot of cool products. They have this great visual comparison tool is there for testing is their main tool, and it's a great product. So let's see. For our next slide, we are going to have Ari here. I'm going to bring him up, and so Ari, here's your slide. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I'm Ari Waller, and I'm the Meetup event manager for JFrog. And we are really, really happy to be here today for another year with UJug. If you haven't heard of JFrog before, we are the DevOps software company. We were founded in 2008, and we have we've been in business for quite some time. But at the same time, you may have heard of us by our product Artifactory, which was written in Java. One of the things that would be interesting, I think, for everybody is because of our upcoming conference which is Swamp Up. We are going to be giving out a free discount code to the people here at UJug tonight, which I thought would hopefully be something that everyone would enjoy. As well as on the slide, you may also see that we are doing a raffle this evening for a Baby Yoda Lego. Now, is the slide up that everyone can see?
No, I had it on you so they could see your beautiful face. Okay, so here's the slide.
I'm much less interesting than the slide for sure. We want to do a raffle tonight. So I really enjoy Star Wars Legos. If you look behind me, that's kind of what I do. When I'm not with my 7 kids, it's usually building Legos. But what I have here is the built Baby Yoda Lego, and we're going to be raffling one off tonight. If you enter with the QR code or the bit.ly that you see, you will be able to enter the raffle, and we will select a winner within 2 business days, and then contact them by email, and then share the winner, of course, with UJug and the entire community. What a lot of people don't know about JFrog, though, is that we do offer a free cloud subscription as well. So it's really great for those who are looking to do some project work on the side. But we have a free tier of service that a lot of people don't know that we offer, which includes Artifactory and vulnerability scanning also. So I'm going to drop those links I just mentioned in the chat. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come and be part of the UJug community tonight. So thank you so much for that.
All right, thanks, Ari. So let's see. Jake, I'm working out with Jake, trying to get him in from Chrome. So Jake, you say you're in from Chrome in another user. I've tried to add a few in there, but I only see the one.
Something from that tab?
Yeah, so I can see what name you're in under. Oh, Jake ST. Okay, let me find that one. So this is going to be an inception moment we're about to see. So prepare yourself. We're going to have Jake on screen from 2 angles. Or is it the same? Let's see. Did you get the invite, Jake?
I did. Let's see if this will work. Oh, we got echo now.
I hesitate to remove you from the other one. So in the chat there, you can see Ari has got the raffle link. Okay, so I'm going to remove that one, and then hopefully there you are. Can you hear us, Jake?
Yep, I got you.
Great. All right, so I can continue the rest of my slides. The reason we're doing this is you'll see later. There's this cool video, and I think Chrome is the best way to play it. Okay, so let me go to the slides. So next month, Venkat is going to present. And so I actually wanted to open up a poll, but I didn't set it up ahead of time. So I am going to do it right now, create a poll. What topic suggestions do you have for Venkat? I'm typing this live here, and let's do, oh my goodness. It looks like I can't do a free form. So just type, so everyone just type it in the chat if you have suggestions for what you would like Venkat to present on next month. He's so versatile, and we usually think of things, and he could usually come up with a presentation on it. So if there's anything just burning into your mind that you would love Venkat to cover, would love to hear ideas. Otherwise, I'm just going to pick, and you probably don't want that. All right, and so after that, for May, we've got Dave Smith from Amazon. Right now, he's got, well, he used to work at Amazon. He did a presentation on Alexa like a year ago, and it was amazing. So he's no longer with Amazon, and we've talked about a CD talk, but I may have some other talks that I'm working with him that I'm excited about. And then June, we have NVIDIA coming out. So we've been working on them for a while, so that's exciting. Okay, so today for door prizes, we've got JetBrains, 2 JetBrains licenses, and then 1 Agile Learner that is Venkat's conference. No, not his conference, his online learning platform. And so an interesting thing actually about his conference, let me zoom back to me. So I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but Venkat had a conference scheduled for a year ago right now. And as you can imagine, as things were going sideways with COVID, it fell apart like at the last moment. He'd been planning on it for a year, so it was terrible timing. He had to cancel the venue, of course, and give everyone their money back. So it's a dev.next conference, and I'm hoping it'll happen this year. So we'll see. All right, I think that is all I've got. Why don't we get to the presentation? So I'll let Jake introduce himself, and we'll get right into the presentation. And if you have questions, type them into the chat as things are going, and then I'll interrupt at good points and bring the question across. So thanks again for everyone joining. I'm going to turn the time over to Jake.
All right. Let's see if this will work. In the words of Bill O'Reilly, we'll do it live. Chrome tab, share audio. There it is. Hopefully this will work. Okay. So yeah, first, thanks for having me. My name is Jake Schroeder. I'm currently the Senior Director of Information Security at HireVue. In about 2 weeks, I'll be leaving, actually end of next week, I'll be leaving HireVue to join as the Head of Information Security at Route. I have a bunch of different initials after my name, certifications. There's my email address, my Twitter account, and LinkedIn. Love to get connected to great people, so feel free to shoot me a connection. And as always, any thoughts that I express here are mine and don't represent either employer. So as Don mentioned, if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to type them in the chat. He'll interrupt me and we'll go from there. So first things first, InfoSec is hard. As defenders, as people who build secure applications, we have to be right 100% of the time, every time. Attackers need to be right once. You've probably heard the tale of Sisyphus, who pushes a stone up the hill only to get it almost to the top and have it roll back down and have to start over. That's what security feels like. In a picture, this is essentially the field of information security. 99% of the time, you throw in something like COVID and gets pretty close to 100%. So the first thing I'd like to do is just kind of take us through a 2020 year in review, just talk about what kind of things we saw in 2020 with the pandemic and how those are changing. And then we'll get into some current events, SolarWinds, Microsoft Exchange, things like that. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Verizon Data Breach and Incident Response Report. They put out a report every year that talks about all kinds of data that they've gleaned from different incidents and breaches. They have, from their beginning until now, they have data on over 755,000 incidents. And each incident, they were able to track about 2,400 data points per incident. So a lot of data. So getting to 2020, this year alone, they recorded 32,002 incidents and 3,950 confirmed breaches were analyzed. Of that group, 70% were external actors, 30% were internal actors. So you're over twice as likely to get a threat from outside of your company as you are from inside. So of those, 27% were ransomware incidents. Those are growing like crazy. 43%, and ransomware, I imagine everybody knows this, but ransomware is essentially a piece of malware that infects your computer and starts encrypting files with a secret encryption key that you then have to pay a ransom to decrypt the files. 43% of those were web application attacks, twice as many as in 2019. 21% were caused by errors and misconfigurations, just mistakes that we've made when we've been deploying different systems, pieces of software, or our own applications. And as you'll notice, these don't add up to 100%. There's overlap between all the numbers, so that's why. 58% handled or was, there was personal data as the target. So that's, personal data that's being processed by companies that you're doing business with was the result of these breaches. And then 67% came from essentially three types of attacks: credential theft, errors, and social attacks. So that's a huge percentage that's coming from not very many different vectors. So tactics that are utilized. So 45% of the breaches included hacking, and hacking in this case is using stolen or breached or brute forced credentials, exploiting vulnerabilities in services or applications that you're using, and then attacks that have already had a backdoor and they're using some type of command and control functionality to maintain a presence. So again, errors are things like misconfigurations, and then your social attacks are going to be phishing, vishing, which is voice, essentially social engineering over the phone. And a word I hate, and I apologize for using it, is smishing, which is essentially phishing over SMS. And again, I apologize for using that word. It's one of my most hated words. Feels dirty to say. So who's behind the breaches? As I mentioned, 70% are external, 30% are internal. Of those 70%, organized crime accounted for 55%. So that's groups that are hacking solely for profit. That can be for ransomware, that can be for data theft, that can be for credit card theft and reselling on dark markets. The really surprising statistic, in my opinion, on this graph is only 4% of breaches had 4 or more attacker options. So actions. What that means is that attackers are getting in 96% of the time with 3 or fewer actions. That means they're sending an email, they're exploiting a piece of software, they're doing something where that's all it takes. There's no multi-chained attacks where they're exploiting one system to get to another. It's really 1 action, 2 actions, 3 actions, and now you have a data breach. So pretty scary. 81% of those, that figure that I just shared, those were detected and contained in a day or less. 72% of them involved large businesses, 28% involved small businesses, and 58% again had personal data compromised. So some other commonalities, 86% of those breaches were financially motivated. So they were going after credit cards, they were going after competitive data, PII, personally identifiable information, with the purpose of making a financial profit off that data. Web apps were involved in 43%. Again, 37% used stolen or used credentials. That's why using individual credentials is so important. And only 27% included ransomware, but again, that's rising, and 22% involved phishing. So these are a little smaller, I apologize, but these are essentially the top threat action varieties in both incidents and breaches. So an incident is just something that you detect that doesn't necessarily lead to a breach. A breach is when they actually get in. So there are some common factors, but most of them are different. Denial of service is still huge. Almost 60% of incidents from this report are going to be denial of service attacks, where attackers are flooding networks and applications with data that looks legitimate, that can be very hard to block, and essentially bringing sites down. We're also seeing a big kick up in using ransoms, where they will send some sort of message before the DOS, before the denial of service, and say, unless you pay us $50,000, $100,000, we're going to launch a denial of service on your site. And then you don't pay, they launch it, and then they ask again, if you wouldn't like to pay, we can keep launching it. And a lot of companies are paying because it's easier to just pay the money and be done with it. But that brings its own set of challenges as well. So phishing, we're getting a lot better at detecting phishing. But as you can see on the right-hand column, about 20% of actual breaches were still caused by phishing, followed by stolen credentials, misconfigurations, misdeliveries, and then you get more towards the internal threats with privilege abuse, and then malware, password dumpers, capturing application data, things like that. So the top malware varieties that we're seeing in breaches and the vectors that we're seeing in breaches, the varieties are going to be password dumpers. That's where malware is installed on the machine. It's scraping memory. It's scraping things like LSAS processes or Active Directory to dump as many credentials from local machines, Active Directory, essentially any credentials they can find, they're trying to dump it and steal it. They can do that on database servers as well, not just workstations. App data, this is going to be PII data, this is going to be credit card data, any kind of data that they can get access to. And then ransomware, that one's we've covered. Downloaders are essentially just staging payloads where they're installing something, some piece of malware on your computer, which will then stage a payload for a more sinister type of malware, whether that be a Trojan or ransomware. And then, exporting data, exploiting vulnerabilities, scanning networks, and then scraping your memory. And as far as the malware vectors, again, email links are huge. Direct install, we'll go into that a little bit later. Usually that's a result of some kind of social engineering, whether it's an email link or whether it's you're tricking somebody to downloading what they think is a legitimate piece of software, and they're actually installing your malware. And then downloaded by malware is, again, where that staging payload comes in. And then email attachments, remote injections, and so on. So we have a principle called survivorship bias. Really, that is, I won't go too much into survivorship bias. It's essentially just seeing that we've survived something, so we know what works. In security, we have kind of the opposite of survivorship bias. Breaches and incidents are records that the victim didn't survive. When there's a breach, we know about it, we know the victim didn't survive. Malware being blocked, on the other hand, protective controls being in place to stop that malware and those breaches is an example of survivorship bias, where the potential victim didn't get the malware, and so they've survived the breach. So there are really 4 possible situations where this comes to light. The first one is large numbers of blocks and incidents. It's something big, really. It's being blocked, but it's also happening a lot. And this is really what we're seeing most in most places right now. There is also large numbers of incidents, but not blocks. This is where you're getting more breaches than you're catching. You're seeing a lot of incidents, but you're not stopping them. You're getting infected, you're getting breached quite a bit. And then there's large number in blocks, but not in incidents. That's when you're blocking a lot of stuff, and a lot of companies are doing really well at this. We're catching a lot more than is getting through. And then finally, there's small numbers in both blocks and incidents, and really this just isn't happening much. If you're a company that's on the internet or an individual that's on the internet, you're going to be attacked almost consistently, and you're going to hopefully have good protections, good defenses in place to catch a lot of those. So these are the top hacking varieties and vectors in breaches. So again, brute force or use of stolen credentials, by far the top utilized hacking method. We have so many different companies that have been breached lately. We talk about LinkedIn, we talk about the RockU password list, where we're getting millions and millions and millions of breach passwords that are known passwords that people are actually using. And it's not difficult as an attacker to, if I know a list of valid usernames, for me to go through and guess slow enough that I'm not locking anybody out, but filtering through all of these credentials to try and get into a web service. Exploiting vulnerabilities is very, very low. About 16% of hacking varieties in breaches are caused directly by exploiting vulnerabilities. And then use of backdoor or command and control, abuse of functionality, and other things like SQL injections are also very low. And the attack vectors, again, are almost 90% web application type attacks. So it's huge. We're making services available on the web, and they're being attacked constantly. So these are some of the examples. A honeypot is essentially a system that is set up on the internet in an attempt to mimic real systems. It listens on all the right ports, but it's not actually doing anything. You may have seen news stories where honeypots have been set up that mimic electrical substations, and within days they're getting attacked by China. So in the honeypots that they set up, these are different connection attempts to authenticate by port from this data. 23 is Telnet, 22 is SSH. Both are remote control, remote access command line utilities or command line services. You can see that those two in and of themselves are 2 orders of magnitude above the next cluster of services. So Telnet and SSH are being attacked consistently. If you're using password-based authentication instead of key-based authentication, and you are using weak passwords, it's pretty much a sure sign that you're going to be compromised, especially if one of those passwords is a known breached password. 555 is Android debug bridge, so ADB for interacting with Android devices. 7547 is a common RPC port, and then 37777 is a very popular port in things like IP cameras, DVRs, things like that. So as you can see, these are being attacked consistently. This is a sample size of 255 billion attacks in the span of 1 year on one honeypot, so pretty huge. So the reality is, for most companies, regardless of how much protection is on the perimeter, as an attacker, I can do not even super involved level of research, and I can generate a pretty good spear phishing email, which is a targeted email that's going to get quite a few people. If you form a good email and you send it to the right person at the right time, I hate to say it, but that's almost a sure sign of breach of your company. So really implementing defense in depth to catch those, to stop those before they spread too much is imperative. We do really good at protecting our perimeters, protecting our applications. We're getting a lot better at protecting the people aspect is still really, really difficult. So as you can see, social actions arrived via email 96% of the time, 3% came through a website, and 1% were associated with phone or SMS type attacks. So phishing has been and still is a very fruitful method for attackers. The good news, well, let's talk about this first. So these are the types of data that are being compromised in these phishing breaches. A lot of credentials where I send you an email saying, click here to change your password. You click there, I've scraped the Gmail page or the Office 365 page. You type in your credentials. Now I have your valid credentials. Personal data, addresses, social security numbers, things like that. Internal data would be company specific data, and then medical data, bank data, secrets, payment data. Classified, you hate to see it on there, but it's on there. But the good news is we are seeing a drastic increase in number of reported campaigns. So it went from a low point of 20% in 2016, meaning that 20% of campaigns, phishing campaigns and tests that were being sent were being reported at least once by one person, and we're up to almost 40% as of 2019. So they are rising. Not necessarily as fast as we'd like to see, but click rates and reporting rates are really doing a lot better. So these are some of the patterns in both breaches and incidents that we're seeing. So again, web applications, these are by and large what you're going to see the most of in both breaches, or really in breaches that are active, that have succeeded and bypassed your web application protections. So again, any malware that doesn't fall into any of the other patterns would be largely nation state or state affiliated attacks, cyber espionage, things like that. It's essentially an unauthorized network or system access that's being done by either an individual or a nation state. And again, we see on the incidents, a huge percentage is denial of service. That accounted for about 13,000 individual incidents in this group of 32,000 incidents last year. So this graph is a little difficult to read, but it shows the comparison between corporate data breaches and business email compromises. So the top part is corporate data breaches. The bottom is business email compromise. That's essentially when an email box is compromised through phishing, through social engineering, through some other method, password guessing, credential stuffing, things like that. So as you can see, the amount of loss, albeit there is a smaller sample size in the corporate data breach, it's very close to the loss from a simple business email compromise. So even though we're looking at 404 versus 13,065, you will lose about as much money or even more money in a simple business email compromise as you could in a full corporate data breach. That could be things like, hey, this is the CEO. We just closed this business with a vendor in China. We need to wire them payment immediately. I'm not at my desk. I need you to take care of it. I'll sign all the forms when I come in Monday. Here's their wiring instructions. Can you take care of that for me? It's unfortunate that it's unfortunate how often that happens. It really happens quite a bit. It could also be, I'm the CEO. I need you to send me the W-2s for all of our employees, or I need you to buy $500 gift cards so that I can send those out to our employees. This again excludes complaints with zero loss amount, but Unfortunately, of that group, there were very few that had zero loss. So cloud assets were involved in about 24% of breaches this year, while on-premise assets, that includes on-premise servers and desktop, laptops, things like that, they're still about 70% in the data set that they were able to capture. Cloud breaches involved email or web application server about 73% of the time, and additionally, 77% of the breaches also, again, involved breach credentials. So a large percentage of all of these breaches listed, again, were a result of breach credentials. So again, most of these successful attacks were very short. Attackers prefer short paths and almost never or very, very rarely attempt long paths. This means that anything you can throw in their way as a defense in depth measure will really have a significant decrease on their chance of stealing your data. Hopefully, by now we've talked a lot about credential theft and use. Two-factor authentication is not perfect, especially if you're using something like SMS-based authentication. It's easy to do SIM jacking attacks, unfortunately, where somebody steals your SIM, and then they can, if they know your password, they now can get your MFA code and can steal your account that way. But it does add an additional step, and additional steps can slow the attacker down and make them less likely, unless they're a dedicated attacker determined to get into your organization. Any steps you can throw in the mix will cause more of them to just say, oh, this one's more effort, not gonna attack this. If you can put in 4 or 5 different steps in your defensive strategy, then you'll block really a majority of the attacks. So this is another graph about the number of steps per incident. So as you can see, for about 200, 225 or so, there was 1 step for an incident. And then we go down about 200 for around 2 steps. Once you get to 10 steps, the numbers are basically non-existent. There are 1 or 2 incidents for anything beyond 10 steps. And we see the same for breaches. About 175-ish, 160 of those breaches happened in 1 step. Once we get to about 10 steps, the number drops immediately. So the more steps you can introduce into your defense chain, the better, the more attacks you'll stop. So this shows that really what actions from an attacker's perspective happen at the beginning, the middle, and the end of incidents, and then we'll go into breaches. So it's not really what's on top that's interesting. We already know that social phishing and hacking are the top 2 methods. And errors are really so short that the beginning is also the end. If you find a misconfiguration or an error that allows you to easily exploit data, a misconfigured S3 bucket, your beginning is also your end, because you find the bucket and now you have all the data just from that misconfiguration. So the interesting bit to me is what's near the bottom. The malware specifically is rarely the first action in a breach, because it has to come from somewhere, right? It has to come from phishing, it has to come from a trick download, something like that. Conversely, social actions almost never end an attack. They're almost always the first step, or to a lesser extent in the middle, almost never finish up an attack. And in the middle, we see that hacking and malware provide the glue that really holds the beginning and the end together. You're seeing a credential stuffing or credential attack, stolen credential, that then allows them to drop a piece of malware, and then that's kind of the end of the chain. You're seeing phishing emails that introduce a piece of malware, or result in stolen credentials that result in a piece of stolen malware, and that's kind of the end of the chain. So I know that these paths can be kind of hard to wrap your head around, but once you do, I think they offer a really strong insight into understanding attackers and really planning your own defenses. So this is the same slide, but for breaches, and it really mirrors the last slide. Hacking or social, usually the beginning. Malware and hacking are usually the glue that hold the attack together. and then you have the end over here with hacking, malware, errors. And then we get into discovery of breaches and containment of breaches. So discovery in days or less, this is super promising, and containment in days or less is up substantially. About 65% of breaches and about 65% of breaches are being discovered in days or less, which is huge. And they're being contained about 80%, 85% in days or less. That used to not be the case. It used to be that detection and containment would take, detection alone would take months. As you can see in 2016 here, about 65, 70% of breaches were discovered in months or more. So we're getting much, much better at discovering and containing those. Discovery, unfortunately, is usually close to the actor disclosing their attack. So whether that's, I've installed malware, or I've installed ransomware, here's your ransom notice. You're going to notice that right after it happens. So this is kind of a red herring in that we are getting better at discovering breaches and containing them in much less time than we used to. But again, a lot of that is due to the different types of malware, the different types of attacks we're seeing. They're being much more blatant with how they're announcing their attacks. So this is a paragraph from the DBIR that just really summed up working in information security a lot of the time. And I'll just read it. All in all, we do like to think that there has been an improvement in detection and response over the past year, and that we are not wasting precious years of our life in a completely pointless battle against the encroaching void of hopelessness. I think that just, unfortunately, that can be security in a nutshell a lot of the time. So finally, the last slide from the DBIR is compares the size of the company and really tries to determine whether the size of the company matters in a breach. And as you can see, there's a pretty wide chasm between small companies and large companies when it comes to number of incidents and breaches. Breaches are more than twice as common in the larger companies than in the small ones. And does that necessarily mean that the smaller companies are flying under the radar, or could it be more likely that they are just not aware that they've received visitors that they didn't invite? The inequality of the two, really, when it comes to the number of incidents, is just insane. 8,600 versus 407. That's huge. It could be an obvious case of, the more money you have, more money, more problems, so to speak. Or again, it could be increased visibility, wider attack surface, more visibility into detecting and stopping those incidents. We don't know at this point, unfortunately. So I have a video, and I hope it's going to work. I have two videos. So really, I want to illustrate how bad phishing and vishing can be. There's a conference that was held pre-COVID called DEF CON in Las Vegas, where a large amount of hackers congregate on Vegas, and besides hacking ATMs and slot machines and things like that, they talk about different research and things that they're doing. There have been a lot of reporters that have come down lately and really tried to illustrate how bad phishing and social engineering can be by saying, I'm a target, use your powers on me, let's see what you can do. So I hope this is going to work. This first one is the reporter asks a fairly well-known hacker to phish him to see what kind of data he can get out of the phishing attack. So let's see if this goes.
I asked Dan Tentler, a well-known security researcher, to turn all of his firepower on me.
I did get into quite a number of things that I found.
So what were the first things you did? How did you start hacking me?
I quickly found your Squarespace blog and had an idea. Basically what I did was created a bogus Squarespace site and sent an email to you a phish asking you to go to this website, run this certificate installer.
And I did it because
Yeah.
I'm an idiot.
So once you ran that, it gave me access to your computer, and I created several fake pop-ups that looked like system pop-ups that would ask you for your credentials.
You didn't even have to have my passwords.
No, you gave them to me.
I gave them to you.
Yeah. So I stole your 1Password keychain.
And 1Password is where I store all my other passwords. So effectively
And
by
your social security number and your Amex stuff and all your stock trading and bank information. I can send email to everyone in this room as you. I am you right now if I wanted to be. If my evilness is working correctly, it should actually be taking pictures of your desktop and pictures through your webcam every 2 minutes. And I have been watching you for about 2 days now. In coffee shops, at your mom's house, on a plane. Here's you editing stuff. There's you like.
Oh my God. So this is literally
every 2 minutes
through my webcam.
Yeah, through this guy.
How badly could you have messed up my life?
I could have made you homeless. I could have made you homeless and penniless.
How?
Like,
How would you make me homeless?
Like I have control of your digital life in its entirety. I have all your credentials. I have all your access to all your financial information, all your work information, all your personal information. I can pay people with your bank account or your Amex account. I am you. I can fully impersonate. The only thing I couldn't doctor would be like your fingerprints.
This is like as bad as it gets.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's bad.
So, as you can see, this is kind of alarmist. Granted, this was done for a news story, but the fact remains: the right email at the right time to really any of us, myself included, is all it takes to get this kind of compromise. And really, unfortunately, as we get better at using things like a password manager, we have to be extra vigilant about the things we click on and the things we do on those computers, because it really, as we get, or if we get compromised, it really opens up the avenue of what kind of data can be exploited locally on our machines. They're a treasure trove of all of our personal data. We do everything, taxes, banking, everything on our computers. So we really, really have to be vigilant about phishing emails and ensuring that we're seeing them and stopping them and not falling for them as much as possible. So this next video is really a social engineering. Oh,
a well-known security researcher, to turn all of his.
There we go. Okay, so this is a similar attack. This is social engineering. This is another professional social engineer who consults for people who will attack companies to point out their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses to help them get better. And he asks her to do a similar attack, but only over the phone with very little information from him.
I invited Chris to hack me with his team, but they're going to hack me using social engineering, which is essentially hacking without any code. They just use a phone and an internet connection.
We help people with human security issues by testing vulnerabilities for like a network test, but it's for the people network. We test those vulnerabilities, see where the holes are, and then help people learn so they can patch them.
Can we try some of this? Can we try some?
Yeah.
See if it works?
Yeah, we probably could have our star visher here make some phone calls as
Let's do it.
Sure. Do you want to do a sample vishing call?
What's vishing?
Vishing is voice solicitation. And basically what you do is you use the phone to extract information or data points that can be used in a later attack.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Who are you going to call?
Maybe I'll call your cell phone provider
Okay.
and see if I can get them to give me your email address.
I bet they're good. I bet they have my back. But yeah, go for it.
I'm going to spoof from your number, so it's going to look like it's calling from you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me okay? My baby, I'm sorry. My husband's like, we're about to apply for a loan and we just had a baby and he's like, get this done by today. So I'm so sorry. I can't call you back. I'm trying to log into our account for uses information and I can't remember what email address we used to log the account. The baby's crying and can you help me? Awesome.
In just 30 seconds,
gmail.com.
Jessica gets my personal email address.
Now, if I needed to add our older daughter on our account so she could call in and make changes, how would I need to go about doing that? You would have to send me a secure PIN through a text message? Yeah, well, the thing is, I don't think I'll be able to receive a text message if I'm on the phone. Oh, I'm not on there either? So I thought when we got married, he added me to the account. Okay, my
Jessica
name is,
uses my girlfriend's name and a fake social security number
5127.
to set up her own personal access to my account.
Wait, I'm sorry. So there's no password on my account right now? Can I set that up?
She even gets the support person to change my password.
Thank you so much for your help today.
So she just basically blocked me out of my own account.
I'll get her fed after this. All right, thank you.
Holy sh! So they just gave you access to my entire cell phone account.
You're gonna have to go on and change your password now because it's Jess, my name.
And all it took was a crying baby and a phone call.
Yes.
I really thought that my cell phone company would protect me.
So yeah, as you can see, it's almost comically easy to compromise a person both via email and social engineering. I mean, all she had to do was play a baby in the background and come up with a story that really any of us could have come up with. And she was able to get not only his personal email address, but add herself to the account and establish a password on the account, which kind of leads me into a question that Steve asked. How sophisticated are the attackers getting specifically as it relates to the ability to hack/penetrate 2FA schemes, multi-factor authentication schemes? As an example, the hackers somehow figure out /discover/learn my password, but then they also hijack my cell phone number to intercept my 2FA configuration to make their login look as if it's me with both factors of authentication. So Steve, that kind of answers your question. If you're using SMA or SMS as your multi-factor authentication, text messages as your multi-factor authenticator, all an attacker has to do is either get the person at T-Mobile or Verizon or whatever to switch your SIM to a SIM that they control, or we're seeing more and more where people are essentially buying, that they're finding somebody who works for T-Mobile, Verizon, and they're paying them off to do these kinds of SIM swaps for them. So they bring them a phone number, they swap the SIM to one that they control, they already know your password, they log in as you, the SMS, instead of going to your phone, goes to their phone. The scary part about that is you can't control that. You are relying solely on T-Mobile or any of the phone companies to protect you in that circumstance. So wherever possible, I urge everybody, do not use text messages as a second factor. There are a lot of places, a lot of banks, unfortunately, where SMS is the only method of multi-factor. In those cases, it's definitely better than nothing. But in most cases, using something like Google Authenticator or Authy or Duo Security, something that uses a time-based one-time password or a TOTP code, that's going to be your best bet to protect yourself from attackers who would attack your MFA. I think that answered your question, but if you have any follow-ups, please feel free to ask. So that's kind of a state of current events or of previous year's events. So now I wanted to get into some of the big things that we've seen since the start of this year. And unfortunately, there have been a few really, really big ones. So the biggest one has been the SolarWinds breach. This is really as bad as it gets. One person said this was IT's Pearl Harbor, and they're not lying. This is really as bad as it gets. So SolarWinds, they do network management, they do systems management, database management, IT security, help desk management, application management, managed services, and they're kind of like Santa Claus. I hope nobody from SolarWinds works here. If so, I apologize. Santa Claus knows if you've been bad or good, if you've been naughty or nice. SolarWinds knows when you mention their name somehow and they add you to their marketing list. So I probably just added all of us to their marketing list. I apologize. Again, if you work at SolarWinds, just joking, and I also apologize. So talking about SolarWinds customers, these are more than 425 of the Fortune 500, all of the US telecom telecom companies, all 5 branches of the US military, the Pentagon, the State Department, NASA, NSA, Post Office, NOAA, the DOJ, and the Office of the President of the US, all 5 of the top 5 US accounting firms, and hundreds of universities and colleges worldwide. And here's just another sample of all of the companies that are customers. So the CISA, which is the US's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, came out and said, you should treat all hosts monitored by SolarWinds Orion monitoring software as compromised by threat actors and assume that further persistent mechanisms have been deployed. So that's huge. That essentially is saying, if you're using this in your network and any machine you're monitoring with this tool, you have to assume that, number one, it's been compromised, and number two, they have persistent access, meaning even if you shut down Orion, even if you upgrade Orion, it's too late. They already have persistence. You're looking at cleaning up this threat. So a blog post that Microsoft released said that the attackers were able to add malicious code to the software updates that were provided by SolarWinds for Orion users. And we'll see kind of how easy that was, unfortunately. But essentially what that means is the attacker then gains a foothold in the network, and then they can use that to gain elevated credentials, to steal passwords, whether it's via monitoring, whether it's via RAM scraping, but they can steal credentials to get further access. From there, they can forge single sign-on tokens, impersonating literally any user or account inside of the organization, including highly privileged accounts, root accounts, system administrator accounts, database administrator accounts. So when they get that, they can add their own credentials anywhere in the network to existing applications, which makes them able to make API calls. And then essentially they have any permission that's assigned to that application using that API call. So this is kind of ironic, but the malicious code that the attackers added to the Orion software likely went undetected as long as it did by antivirus, because SolarWinds specifically said that in order for their product to work properly, you needed to whitelist the directories that SolarWinds lived in, so the antivirus didn't scan it at all. So it was essentially just a green field for these attackers to get an attack and deploy any sort of malware that they wanted there without any threat of antivirus detecting it. And not only antivirus, but also group policy object restrictions. So they're essentially saying, here's this open area, do whatever you want. We're not going to look. Here's this bank, the vault's open, no security guards, nobody works here. We trust you though, do what you got to do. So really bad. So this was January 12th, 2021. This was still very early in the breach. And this company, BitSite and Cover, they are agencies that scan the internet, use open source intelligence to get data about the security of different websites. So they estimated the insured losses, and this was about, depending on when you count detection, this was about a month in from detection. We estimate that the insured losses from the SolarWinds attack to be $90 million, which includes incident response and forensic services for companies who are impacted by the incident and have cyber insurance coverage. So that's insurance companies that are going to have to pay that 90 million or up to that 90 million or some part of that 90 million, hopefully. But imagine all of the companies who didn't have adequate insurance, how bad it's going to be for them, or government organizations where we're processing the most sensitive data for our country. So this was an email that, as you can see from the date here, was sent November 19th of 2019. As you might remember a few slides back, they said that there was the blog post by Microsoft said that they used a foothold in the network based on credentials that they were able to use to upload the malicious data. So this email from November 19th, 2019 is an email to SolarWinds security team saying, hey, I found a public GitHub repo which is leaking FTP credentials that belong to SolarWinds. Gave the repo URL, the specific file, the download URL, and the username and password. As you can see, this is their main download site. So downloads.solarwinds.com. That's where all of their downloads for not only Orion, but all of their software was being hosted there. So you're talking about, this tweet is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but reading about a sophisticated attack on FireEye leveraging SolarWinds. The password to this FTP site was SolarWinds123. Not hard to imagine how this happened with an easily guessable password like that. And the CEO during a congressional hearing said, "I believe that was a password an intern used on one of his servers back in 2017, which was reported to our security team, and it was immediately removed." I don't know what to say to that. Lots of problems. An intern setting passwords on a public download site. This is, it seems like scapegoating to me, really. The problem was obviously bigger than one intern, and if an intern is able to set those kind of credentials, that's kind of a big problem in and of itself. So this is from the Global Digital Forensics and Incident Response Lead named Azim Aleem. There's no end in sight, no end to the fallout in sight. In addition, organizations must consider that more threat actors are likely to mimic the SolarWinds incident, given the success of the attack. So these supply chain attacks are going to, I think, explode. One of the big attacks from a few years ago called Petya was essentially attackers were able to compromise a big piece of accounting software that Ukraine used in their government. It was a Ukrainian piece of accounting software. They compromised the update portion of that application and were able to push out all of that malware, all of that ransomware to most of Ukraine based on that supply chain attack. So these are becoming more popular, and given how successful this was, how many of these world's most protected organizations they were able to get into, this is going to happen quite a bit more. So as we get more of the fallout, we found that the US court was affected, and that there is evidence that suggests that sealed court records were accessed as part of this SolarWinds breach. So thankfully, these don't hold classified documents that have been classified for national security reasons, but it is full of sensitive sealed filings, subpoenas for email records, trap and trace requests, which is essentially trying to figure out who a suspect is talking to by phone, when, and for how long. If data like that gets into the wrong hands, then any of these biggest criminals or big criminals who have either a trap and trace or they're getting their emails subpoenaed, if they get any kind of heads up that this is happening, that's one step ahead for them. The Department of Justice said that the same SolarWinds hackers breached its Office 365 system and read and sent email. So this breach wasn't discovered until December 24th. That's 9 days after the original hack came to light. The government very quickly came out with guidance saying, if you have this, you have to shut it down immediately. You have to update it. You have to confirm that you've done this. This breach 9 days later was still having an effect. They took control of the Office 365 system and accessed email from about 3% of their accounts, which doesn't seem like a lot until you figure that the DOJ has about 100,000 different email accounts. So about 3,000 people had their email sent and received from a compromised email account. And there are about half a dozen other agencies that they think were also infected. So this was, again, on December 15th. So this was after 2 days after the breach was announced and discovered and announced to the SEC. This researcher was able to still, 2 days later, download the infected installer from SolarWinds website. So even though they knew about the breach, even though they knew it was an issue, there's a lot to do. and that infected installer was still there at least 2 days later after the breach was announced. So a lot of cleanup still. So thankfully, they found a kill switch pretty early on. It was avsvmcloud.com. And really what would happen is if that domain was registered and was listening, the malware that they created would terminate itself and wouldn't execute any further. FireEye worked with GoDaddy and Microsoft to essentially take ownership of the domain from the attackers who had previously registered it, and it deactivated the infections. Now, the caveat here is that killed any new infections and killed any new deployments. But as I mentioned, you have to assume that if you were infected by this, there were already other persistence mechanisms that were put in place. So this doesn't actually remove any or invalidate any of the existing malware. You still have to go in and clear up that malware. So this is just a timeline of the incident. So September 2019 is when the threat actor first accessed SolarWinds. They went back in time to identify suspicious activity. Their forensics teams did. The 2019 version, the platform version, that's where it looks like they released the code initially to just test their build. And then the February 20th of 2020, the malware was initially compiled and deployed, was pushed as a hotfix, and then the threat actors came in and removed the malware from the build VMs so that they wouldn't be detected. And then it wasn't until over a year later, so December 12th of 2020, when SolarWinds was notified of the issue, and then they started notifying customers, and they released a software fix 3 days later, and then US CERT issued an alert, and the investigation is still ongoing, and we think we know it either. I've heard that it could be China that's behind it, it could be Russia that's behind it. You know, it's hard to say with things like that. So really the scary thing about this is it defeated the usual standard security advice that we get as security engineers and, you know, development engineers. Only install signed versions. They infected the supply chain. The software that they released, the malware they released, it was signed, and it was properly signed. Update your software to the latest version. That doesn't help because the updated version was the one that was infected. Monitor software behavior. This was what eventually detected the issue, but since it was so stealthy and since antivirus was whitelisting the directory where this ran, it was too late when it was finally detected. And then reviewing source code wasn't a great defense either. In this case, it's not certain that the developers could have spotted the changes. They were written to look like expected code, and they also had control of the build environment, so they could insert the attack without it being visible. And really, CrowdStrike, the agency that did a lot of the investigation, said that it was written to be able to detect when it was installed on a SolarWinds developer system and to do nothing, essentially lie in wait until specific source code files were accessed by the developers. And essentially that allowed them to replace source code files on the fly during the build process before the code was compiled. So they obviously invested a ton of effort into this, into ensuring that it was properly rolled out, undetected. They really were good about prioritizing operational security to make it so they weren't detected until it was much too late by, you know, even the best developers in the security team who were looking for this stuff. So this is a little bit of extra fun depending on how you define fun. Investors in SolarWinds traded about $280 million in stock just a few days before the hack was publicly revealed. That's always great to hear and great to see from, you know, the richest people in the world. I think prior to COVID, we had some senators and congressmen who were also selling a lot of their holdings before the rest of us knew what was going on. So always fun to see that. Again, the concern right now, this is from the SolarWinds CEO, is that similar processes may exist in software development environments at other companies throughout the world. And that's a legitimate concern. He's absolutely right. And unfortunately, with as difficult as these things are to detect, it can be too late before we figure out that we've been breached as bad as we've been breached. So that's kind of a worst case. That's kind of a hopeless story. I don't mean to give you a hopeless story, but that's kind of the worst case, as bad as it gets. So next, let's talk about Microsoft Exchange. So earlier this month, they released 4 fixes for 0 days that were being actively exploited. These were exploiting Microsoft Exchange itself, as well as Outlook web access. Thankfully, only on-premise machines. I don't know why I say thankfully. I don't use on-premise, so maybe that's why I say thankfully. But these were very dedicated, very well-researched attacks as well. And once they exploited these vulnerabilities, they left behind a web shell. Web shell is essentially an easy-to-use, usually password-protected remote shell that can be accessed over the internet by anybody, can execute system commands, can add users, can remove users, can change config files, especially if it's running a system which these were, it can get really bad. So they believe that, again, a Chinese group called Hafnium was responsible for these attacks, and that they think that they infected over 30,000 US organizations via this attack. So this was the former head of the CISA agency saying, this is the real deal. If your organization runs an OWA Outlook Web Access server exposed to the internet, assume compromise. If it was up from February 26th to March 3rd, check for an 8-character ASPX file in your web root on your Exchange system. If you get a hit, you're essentially infected and you need to start going into incident response mode. So thankfully, a lot of these web shells were easily detected. The indications of compromise were fairly static across infections. The web shell name changed, but they were usually 8 characters. They were almost always in the same location, following the same web shell. There weren't a lot of changes, so they were easier to detect. But police departments, hospitals, city and state governments, credit unions, just about everybody who's running self-hosted Exchange and wasn't patched within that few days window was almost certainly hit with that 0-day attack. And again, this is a crazy, huge hack. The numbers I've heard dwarf what reporters here, and by Brian Krebs is saying, this is just kind of attempting to understand why, trying to, are they trying to make the new administration look bad? Is it a gang that's attempting to attack a lot of stuff? Are there contractors that work for the US government attempting to cause a lot of damage? So this is the US CERT organization saying that they're aware of the issue and that they urge scanning for the indications of compromise. They published a lot of detection tools, both them and Microsoft. So they were able to detect a lot of the infections very quickly, thankfully. So I'm going to go through the timeline of events for this attack, but there are some key players. So there's DevCore, which is a security consulting, pen testing, and red teaming firm. There's Orange Sai. He is the principal security researcher for that DevCore company. There's Volexity. They're an incident response firm who detected the attacks on January 6th and told Microsoft about it on February 2nd. And there's Dubex, which is a Danish security firm who first saw clients hit on January 18th. To clarify, with the Volexity, that was looking back. They didn't discover it on January 6th and then just sit on it until February 2nd. Once they saw it was an issue, then they were able to go back and say, okay, this is when it's first started happening. We know that we need to start looking from here. So this is a tweet from that security researcher saying this patch release is a big one. It's coming soon. And a short advisory is also standing by. By the way, no one, essentially challenging people to guess the right target in the comments, and nobody did. So talking about the timeline, January 5th, that DevCore group alert Microsoft of its findings. January 6th, Volexity starts spotting attacks that use unknown vulnerabilities in Exchange. And then DevCore tells Microsoft that they had reproduced the problem and verified their findings. DevCore said that Microsoft had reproduced their bug and verified the issues. DevCore snagged a proxylogon.com domain, which was used in an effort to demonstrate the vulnerability. And then DubX alerts Microsoft about attacks on a new Exchange flaw. January 29th, so not a month into it yet, Trend Micro published a blog post about China Chopper web shells being dropped via Exchange flaws, but this attributed an Exchange bug that was patched in 2020 instead of the currently exploited Exchange bug. So February 2nd, Volexity warned Microsoft about active attacks on these previously unknown Exchange vulnerabilities. On the 8th of February, Microsoft told DubX it has escalated the report internally, which you love to hear because it essentially tells you nothing. And then on the 18th, Microsoft confirms with DevCore that there's a target date of March 9th for publishing security updates. So that's from January 5th, when they first tell them about the issue, to now a month and a half later, Microsoft says, yep, we're going to release that next month. 2 months later, when you know it's being actively exploited, that's kind of frustrating. That's the second Tuesday of the month, which is Patch Tuesday, and that's when Microsoft usually releases their updates. So on February 26th and 27th, there was now targeted exploitation that turned into global mass scanning and mass exploitation, tooling being written to exploit as many machines as possible, as quickly as possible, and to start backdooring those vulnerable servers. So only a week earlier than previously planned, Microsoft releases fixes to plug those 4 zero-day vulnerabilities. Again, almost 2 full months later after they knew about the issue. And then this researcher noted for finding and reporting also some different bugs in the past, joked that nobody guessed Exchange as the source of his tweet about probably the most seriously exploited bug that he's ever reported. And then on March 3rd, tens of thousands of Exchange servers were compromised worldwide, with thousands more servers getting freshly hacked each hour. March 4th, the National Security Advisor tweeted about the importance of patching Exchange flaws and how to detect if they were compromised. Later on March 5th, in a live briefing, the White House press secretary expressed concern over how many machines were getting infected. Krebs on Security broke the news. This was the first time that there was widespread data about how many organizations were being infected. So 30,000 currently, more being exploited all the time, hundreds of thousands more worldwide, and now backdoors were being actively installed. Wired.com confirmed the reported number of victims, and then former CISA head Chris Krebs tweets the real victim numbers dwarf what's been reported publicly. So according to him, that 30,000, that's not even close to how bad it really is. CISA says it's aware of widespread domestic and international exploitation of these server flaws. On the 7th, security experts continue to notify victims, coordinate remediation, and then they want to make sure that stage 2 of the attack, which is further exploitation of already compromised machines, is being considered and monitored for. Microsoft says 100,000 of the 400,000 Exchange servers globally remain unpatched. So this is about a week after the patch is released, and still a quarter of all Exchange servers were not patched. Patch Tuesday comes around, they patch another 82 different vulnerabilities in different Windows software and their web browser. On the 10th, a working exploit for the Exchange flaw was published to GitHub and then removed by Microsoft, which owns GitHub. Not a very good place to post the exploit, but that means that exploit code is now available to anybody, and the amount of attackers that can take advantage of this is now wide open. So on the 10th, security firm ESET reports that at least 10 APT cybercrime and espionage groups have been exploiting these flaws for their own purposes. So it's already spread from the initial attack to now multiple attackers are taking advantage of this. March 12th, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and others report that Microsoft is investigating how the exploit that he shared with Microsoft ended up being exploited publicly prior to Microsoft issuing its update. So now they're attempting to go after the researcher who was the first who reported the issue, with the understanding that perhaps he also released the exploit to make it publicly accessible to more people. On the 12th, so 10 days after the patch was released, they said there's still 82,000 unpatched servers, and that the groups attempting to exploit the vulnerability are now trying to implant ransomware and other malware. And that's where we were as of a few days ago. There's still tens of thousands of Exchange servers that are being unpatched, or that are unpatched, that are being actively exploited, probably as we speak. Also kind of a worst of the worst. We haven't seen this many issues in security that are this bad since I've been in security, certainly. You know, we've had issues with encryption. We've had Heartbleed and Beast and SSL vulnerabilities. But things like this really dwarf that because of how vast it is, how many people are infected, how avoidable it is for the Exchange issue, and just essentially every Exchange server in the world being vulnerable for 2 months before the patch is released is just, it's just insanity. It's really kind of the worst of the worst. So the last one that I want to talk about is Verkada. So Verkada is a cloud security camera solution. They make great stuff. Their clouds are great. I don't know how many of you guys have like a home security system, but usually your network video recorder is kind of clunky. It's hard to navigate. It's not very networked. They don't patch them a ton. These guys have really the cream of the crop as far as good security cameras and software to back it are concerned. Almost to a fault, where they can do like filtering people by gender, checking the color of people, the color of their clothes, other attributes, detecting their faces, following them throughout a building. So really, you know, really good software, but also for the privacy conscious can be kind of terrifying. So they were breached, which is why we're talking about it. The attackers showed a reporter a list of all of the organizations that were affected by this breach, and there were 24,000 unique organizations affected. So that's 24,000 different companies with Verkada security cameras in their buildings that now can be controlled by these attackers. Recordings viewed, real-time footage viewed, scary stuff. So this is the inside of a Tesla service station. Also affected were Cloudflare. They saw video footage from inside women's health clinics, psychiatric hospitals, police departments, prisons, schools, up to and including Sandy Hook, Verkada itself. On this list, there were only over 150,000 different cameras, individual cameras that these attackers had access to. In one of the videos that the reporters saw, it showed inside of a Florida hospital, showing 8 staffers tackling a man and pinning him to a bed. You know, there's no context in that, but that's the kind of stuff they can see. Another video was in a Tesla warehouse in Shanghai, and it showed workers on an assembly line putting together Tesla cars. They said that they obtained access to 222 different cameras in Tesla factories and warehouses alone. So here's, you know, a Verkada camera that's deployed inside of a school. Kind of terrifying to think that some random person could be sitting there watching your kid or anybody's kids while they're in school. This is the inside of a prison. One of the video cameras showed police officers inside of a police station questioning a man in handcuffs that these attackers could then watch. There were 330 security cameras inside of this jail. They also offer a feature called People Analytics, and that will let you search and filter based on those attributes. So gender, different traits, clothing colors, your face, Pretty scary stuff. A lot of these cameras were hidden inside of thermostats, inside of vents, inside of defibrillators, and they tracked inmates and correctional officers throughout the entire jail. All in 4K high def video, by the way. So how did they get in? I won't ask how many of us have the concept of a super user account or a super admin account in our software. But essentially that's what happened. They gained access through a super admin account that was a support level account for Verkada and allowed them to get access into every single camera of every single customer. So there were no separation or segregation of duties, no separation saying, this support team can access these cameras. If you got into one of these accounts, you had full access to every camera that they had. And this user that found this, they found a username and password publicly exposed on the internet, because of course they did, right? So their response was, we've disabled all internal administrative accounts to prevent any unauthorized access. Our internal security team and external security firm are investigating the scale and scope of the issue, and we've notified law enforcement. So the scary thing about this is this could have easily been leveraged to further exploit other cameras or other PCs, other systems inside of those networks. So a lot of the bigger companies, you hope, have proper segregation where the cameras are on maybe a different network segment, a different VLAN from, say, internal servers. But a lot of smaller companies, SMB type companies, they're just going to throw these cameras on the same network as their internal network, and then they could use that to gain a foothold further into the network to exploit and continue to pillage any of the data on their network. So this quote, I think, is really important. I speak for myself. I have, internal cameras that are, facing outside, but they have speakers on them. There's one in my unfinished basement that just kind of watches the basement. And they're cameras from a pretty well-known company, not just Chinese stuff that I bought off of Alibaba. They're a good, well-known company, but this is really a wake-up call to self-surveillance. We're putting these cameras in my case, and I'm sure others, in our homes, in our companies, and we are building these networks of surveillance for ourselves, for our families, for our colleagues, and that you really need to consider the consequences. Most of these companies, Wise, for example, they make a camera that costs $20, very, very cheap, very good quality camera, US-based company, based out of Seattle, I think. They've started doing AI person detection. Now, what that means today is they can detect a person. Who knows how that evolves to, now it sees, oh, Jake came home from work and got out of his car at this time and walked in because there's a camera in the garage that monitors the garage that can see. This person in this car who's a neighbor drove past at this time, so I know that they got home around a certain time. So we're giving ourselves either a false or a real sense of security, but that's its own security threat. So we need to, as we start thinking about putting some of these cameras and other systems in our homes, that can be cameras, that can be smart speakers. We just need to think about the security threat that those kinds of things bring with it, and ensure that it's a proper security threat for the risk level that we're comfortable with. So that's enough doom and gloom. So I know we're a little over time, so I'll try and zoom through the rest of these. Really, I wanted to talk about some of the considerations that we should make when we're working remotely, and that can be home, that can be remotely, pre-COVID or even post-COVID if we're working remotely. What kind of things should we do? Some are basic, some are a little more in-depth. Here we go. So avoid public Wi-Fi. This one's pretty clear. When you're on public Wi-Fi, there are two problems to solve. One is that anybody else on that public Wi-Fi network is on the same network segment as you are. Unless you have a firewall between you and them, they can attack your computer from across the room. There's also any interested observers on the network can monitor your traffic as it goes by. So if you have a personal hotspot, that's the best to use. If you don't, use a VPN as much as you can. So there's a device I have called a Wi-Fi Pineapple. It can take any networks, mimic them. It can mimic, say, your home network as being an open network, and you connect, and I put up a little prompt that says, I can't connect, enter your password. I could steal your password that way. It can clone open networks and intercept all of your data very, very, very easily, de-authenticate you from your open network, from your Starbucks network, and send you through my connection instead. So open networks, it's best to avoid public Wi-Fi whenever possible. If you can't, please use a VPN. Block sightlines. So shoulder surfing, unless you have crazy kids like I do, shoulder surfing hopefully is not much of an issue when you're at home. As you go back into the office, as vaccinations are more prevalent and we get more ability to go out into the world and work, be cognizant that somebody looking over your shoulder can see what you're typing in, can see what's on your screen. Just be cognizant of that. Never leave your work computer in a vehicle. So these are easy to smash and grab, easy to steal your laptop and your data. Your trunk isn't really any better unless you have a trunk monkey. If as an attacker, I see somebody get out of their car with their laptop bag and put it in the trunk, it'll slow it down a little bit, but it's not going to stop somebody who wants to get your laptop. It may make your life a little easier in the short term, but they're going to get in if they want to get in. So don't trust random thumb drives. If you find a thumb drive, destroy it. They're cheap enough that, hopefully none of us are cheap enough, and I'm a pretty cheap guy myself. Hopefully none of us are cheap enough to just pick up a thumb drive and say, oh, I want to use that. A classic and easy to implement hacking technique is to buy a bunch of cheap thumb drives, whether I'm dropping them in a parking lot, whether I'm dropping them outside of a building, whether I'm dropping them in a workplace, whether I'm going to an event, a Utah Java developers group or user group event and dropping them there, putting a sticker on, that resembles your logo. And I've loaded some documents that have macros that are now backdoors. Or there is a USB device called a rubber ducky, a USB rubber ducky. It mimics a USB device, but it emulates a keyboard. So it can type thousands of keystrokes per second. You plug that into your computer. Before you know what's happened, I've executed PowerShell, I've executed Bash, Python, whatever, implemented a remote shell back to a server that I control, and now I have a connection to your machine, and I can hack away at it just because you've plugged in a USB drive. So if you don't know where it came from, don't plug it in, just toss it. They're cheap enough to buy them. Use a USB data blocker when you're charging at a public phone charging station. My perspective is never use these. It's not worth the risk. We all have phones. We still have charging bricks, maybe not with us all the time, but and really phones are getting better at detecting when you're being plugged into a computer versus just a power port, but they didn't always used to. Now on an iOS or an Android device, when you plug in, if it is a computer and it's doing a data connection, it'll say, do you trust this computer? That wasn't always the case and still isn't for older or cheaper Android devices. So if you have to use a public phone charging station, use a USB data blocker. It's essentially just a small device that removes the data pins from the phone side and only passes through the power pins. And this is another example of why you shouldn't use a public charging. I won't go through all of this because it's kind of long. But
fact: 95% of all USB-equipped devices are vulnerable to a USB kill attack.
So essentially, this is a device that charges the capacitors on the device and then offloads them into the computer itself. So MacBook Pros, latest versions, vulnerable. Smart TVs, vulnerable. Phones, vulnerable. iPads, vulnerable. Monitors, mice. Really, most things with USB, routers even, vulnerable. So these can easily be built into that kind of
fact:
It's that kind of charging station, and by plugging it in, it charges the capacitors on the device. You plug it in, it discharges them directly into your device, kills them. So that would be, a pretty malicious attack without much gain, but better to avoid the risk. Secure your home router. Nothing's better for an attacker than a default password, whether it's a Wi-Fi password or an admin password on your machine. A lot of routers still, when you buy them, you plug them in, they're publishing a remote console connection to the internet. So anybody that connects to that needs a username and password to change any setting on your router. And if you also don't change the password, then they have everything they need to say, oh, instead of DNS going through Comcast or Cloudflare or whoever you're going to send it through, I have a DNS server. Why don't you send it through me? And then every once in a while, I'll reroute Gmail to a server I confirm. If you're not paying attention to TLS and encryption warnings, now I can steal passwords fairly easily. So change it to something unique. Always install updates, maybe not right as they come available, but soon after they become available, just to ensure that any exploits are being patched. I know this isn't always possible, but the fact is, if you don't separate work and personal devices, you never know if one is compromised. Beyond that, as somebody who has been in kind of a big brother position, or at least a trusted position, I'm vehemently opposed to Big Brother. I don't want to see what you're doing on personal stuff on your work laptop, personal laptop. But how many of us know with 100% certainty what monitoring is done on our corporate laptops? How many of us know that if we go to Facebook or we do our taxes or whatever, that some IT geek isn't watching what we're doing, whether on purpose or just by circumstance? But it's best to try and separate those as much as possible. This one's pretty easy nowadays. Encrypt all your devices. BitLocker for Windows, FileVault for Mac, DMCrypt or similar for Linux, and then Android beyond Android 6, iOS beyond iOS 8 is encrypted by default. But if somebody steals your device, encryption will prevent them from getting access to your data. Keep your OS and your software and other devices, if it has an update, cameras, smart scales, smart vacuums, smart fridges, if it has an OS, if it has an internet connection, patch it when patches are available. Antivirus. So this one's, antivirus as an attacker is trivially bypassed by most determined attackers. They get around it like it's nothing. But it'll stop a lot of the low-hanging fruit, especially for more non-technical people. Our families, having antivirus on their computers will definitely be helpful. For Windows devices, Windows Defender is perfectly adequate. You don't need to pay for it unless you want. You don't need to pay for antivirus, period, unless you want extra features like configurable firewall, credit monitoring, credit detection, that kind of thing, which most people are fine with just Windows Defender. If your company doesn't provide you with a password manager, I would recommend getting one. Bitwarden is free and it's great. I think it costs $10 for their paid plan. I use 1Password personally. It's amazing. Really, we should all be using randomized passwords as much as possible, and using one strong password to get into there makes it so if I steal a password from LinkedIn, you're not reusing your LinkedIn password on some other site, your bank account that I care about getting into. And then use multi-factor authentication wherever possible. With credential attacks, credential stealing, credential stuffing, getting in is trivial. SMS, again, SMS MFA is better than nothing, but it's not great. Use something like Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, Authy, Duo. YubiKey is also great if you want a hardware-based device, but time-based one-time passwords at a minimum, using usually a mobile app. So very quickly, what are we doing right as engineers, as security? So we are getting much, much better at patching. We're patching faster, we're detecting things faster. And again, any internet accessible host should be patched regularly, whether that's a laptop, whether that's internet coming into the device, whether that's the device having access to the internet. If it's on the internet, it should be patched regularly. Reporting phishing emails. We're getting very, very good at that. And detecting and containing breaches sooner, doing well there too. And we're getting really good. We have been really good for a long time at defending the perimeter of our networks. We're also getting a lot better at defending our applications, doing things like sanitizing input, building security into the application, into the API, doing proper authorization and authentication. We're doing a lot better there too. So what can we do better? Really, my favorite thing right now is passwordless authentication. It's a better user experience. It offers better security. There's less overhead, less maintenance for people resetting passwords. Really, instead of a password, identity can be verified by something you have. So a possession factor, whether it's a one-time password generator like Google Authenticator or something similar, YubiKey, hardware token, or it can be an inherent thing. Likely, less likely for most of our use cases, I would imagine, something like a fingerprint, face, retina. But going to a site and putting in your email address, for example, and then having it push a TOTP code, amazing. Having it send me an email and saying, somebody just authenticated or put your password in. If that's you, click this link, and it handles the authentication piece behind the scenes. It really makes the user experience so much better too. Again, having native MFA built and baked into our applications. A lot of places will say, well, if you want MFA, you have to set up some sort of single sign-on SAML 2.0, ADSF, something like that, ADFS rather, to handle the authentication, and then you can roll your own MFA based on that. But really having MFA built into our applications, ideally not SMS. It's fine to offer that as an option, but ideally having some TOTP is best. And then ephemeral keys. Keys should not be long-lived anymore, whether it's an SSH key, whether it's a database key, an API key, where possible, those should be generated as needed. Secrets management like HashiCorp Vault, AWS Secrets Manager for those of us in AWS, Kubernetes Secrets Manager. They can store your API keys, your passwords, your secret keys, SSH keys, database keys. Going along with that, never store credentials in source code, even if it's an internal or private repo. It's hard to remove them from history, and really it's too easy to leak. So just avoid that when you can. Use separate credentials per environment. Your production environment shouldn't have the same set of credentials as your staging and your development environments. I've seen it way too many times where a staging or development environment will have debug mode turned on, and now you're just given a ton of information that shouldn't otherwise be available, and now that gives some kind of foothold, some kind of knowledge about your application, about your API, that I can then use to exploit in other environments. When you're generating these key stores, you shouldn't give read access to a person to the entire credential store. There are people, infrastructure operations type people, they may need it for maintenance, but for engineers, for developers, really, and for services and applications, we should grant access to the specific keys we need, or a specific small set of keys that we need, really using granular controls and not giving our applications or our APIs access to the whole key store. And then really, we shouldn't be putting keys in client applications. If you're storing keys in JavaScript, if you're storing keys on mobile devices, whether those are encryption keys, API keys, database credentials, you have to assume that if you're putting something that the client can see, the client will see it, and those credentials will be breached. So never store credentials on a client-side device. Implementing control frameworks. This can be anything from the OWASP Top 10, paying attention to that. That's more of a framework in that it's a set of vulnerability types that you need to watch out for web applications. But things like the CIS benchmarks or the CIS critical security controls that SANS used to put out, they're more of an organization-wide set of controls. and really impact many areas of the business, but engineering is definitely one of those areas that they impact. And then sanitize your inputs, stopping things like cross-site scripting attacks, SQL injections, things like that. We should always be sanitizing our inputs, using queried parameters for SQL injection, stopping those types of attacks as well. Really, security works best, in my opinion, from an engineering perspective when we automate as much as we can and we implement it directly into the CI/CD pipeline. If we can take as much, static code vulnerabilities and static code scanning, dynamic code scanning, checking for vulnerable third-party libraries or open source libraries that we've written or that we're using from outside. If we can check vulnerabilities as part of the pipeline and say, hey, you've got this vulnerability, but it's a low, so just put it on your list. We've created a ticket automatically, clean it up when you have the time, versus you've just introduced an old version of this third-party library that has a known remote code execution vulnerability. You need to, we're canceling this deploy. You need to fix that before we're going to deploy that. Building as much of that into the pipeline as possible and automating that, abstracting it as much from you as developers as possible. That's more towards the security, the infrastructure operations teams. But really pushing for that kind of security, I think, will work the best. And then strong randomized passwords. We talked a little bit about that with password managers. SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. So these are essentially DNS records that help prevent against spoofing. So without an SPF record, I can spin up a postfix server or an SMTP server of any kind on my Raspberry Pi at home, and I can spoof emails as if they're coming from your domain. And then DKIM can sign certain emails. DMARC says, if you're not passing SPF and DKIM, what should we do with your message, essentially? It's definitely an oversimplification, but it's saying, what should we do with that? Should we quarantine it? Should we reject it? If we reject it, who should we notify? So implementing those and making it so attackers can't spoof email from you or your companies is huge as well. And then when you're storing passwords, salting them individually, hashing them is huge. We need to have good password management. Really, that's to say, defense in depth. We need to have good defense in depth. We need to make it so that these attackers, they can't just get in one step. We need to make ourselves as unappetizing of a target as we can by all of these different defenses that we've put in place. So this is just another example of social engineering. It's about 2 minutes. I think it's worth playing because it's really bad. This is one that I did about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. The pretext is horrible, but unfortunately the person fell for it, even having a bad pretext. This is somebody that at the time worked for our company. The voices have been changed to protect the innocent and the not so innocent. And it shows how easy it is and how devastating it can be for a simple attack like this. So I'll let this play.
Hi, it's Alan over in IT. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good. Hey, the reason I'm calling today, we've had some issues with our backups running on Gmail. It looks like your account is one of them that's been affected. I just need to log into the admin interface as you and get that figured out. Do you know what your Gmail password is?
No, they never told me. It's automatic on my computer.
Okay.
Maybe.
Is it in the password repo? In LastPass?
I don't actually. Let me check that. So basically, like when I got my computer, I just went to mail.hierarchy.com.
Okay.
But I can check in LastPass. So I think it works.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
Sure.
I'm pulling it up.
Yeah, if that works, I can just log in to LastPass as you as well and get that fixed. So that should work just fine as well.
Yeah. I need to grab my password for LastPass.
Okay.
Yeah, so am I just not getting emails or something?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I am ready for that password whenever you are.
Yeah, just logging into LastPass.
Yeah, if you can actually give me the LastPass password, that works too. I can just take care of it with that.
Yeah, let me make sure it works.
Okay.
I just tried it and it didn't.
Sure.
Oh, okay, yeah, it works.
Okay.
So it's kind of weird, but so it's
Okay, let me try that. Okay, so it's asking for that second factor. Can you, do you have it on like your phone, Google Authenticator or something that you can pull up that token and give me?
yeah, I can pull that up right now.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just pulling it up right now.
Thanks.
So I have 934340.
34340.
Okay, it just went invalid actually. So
Okay, I am in,
one.
so we are good. I
That
was
works?
able to get in. Yep.
All right.
Cool, that's all I needed.
Anything else?
Nope, that should be it. I'll fix it. If you don't hear from me, then there's nothing to worry about, but I'll let you know if there's a problem.
Okay, all right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye.
So, famous last words, if you don't hear anything from me, there's nothing to worry about. But that illustrates just how, you know, we all have our own blind spots. We all have our own issues that we hear the right or the wrong pretext at the right or wrong time. And even though we have MFA in place, if somebody asks for the MFA, then they get the MFA. With that, we were able to get access to essentially everything that person had access to. So email, full administrative access, Salesforce data, their entire LastPass mailbox, because that's the password that they actually gave us. Pretty bad, pretty worst case. And again, it's you call and ask, you come up with a pretext that's not very believable. We need to back up your email, which I don't know who does that anymore. But yeah, so it's the right call on the right day or the wrong call on the wrong day. We're all vulnerable to that kind of stuff, whether it's a phishing email, whether it's a vishing email, we can all get caught. So I use that as an illustration, but it really is a problem that we're all vulnerable to, especially as we, you know, deal with more of our maybe more non-technical family and friends. One of my parents the other day called Apple and somebody told her to go buy gift cards to pay for the service. Thankfully, she called me before she went and got the gift cards, but that was after she gave this person remote access to their phone. So it's important to be aware of that and to really make yourself a resource for those around you who need that as well. But with that, that's all I have. So if there are any last minute questions, again, there's my email, my Twitter handle, and LinkedIn. Please feel free to send me a connection on any of those. Looks like there was one more question about recommendations for optical scanners or fingerprint scanners. Unfortunately, Steve, I have no direct experience with either of those. So yeah, I don't know, unfortunately. I wouldn't be able to make any recommendations, but good question. Maybe somebody else in the group has some experience with that.
Excellent. Thanks, Jake. So one question I had is you mentioned the weaknesses with SMS. Is using like a virtual phone number, like a Google Voice, superior to that? Superior to regular SMS?
Yeah, it's a good question. It is really the same thing in different ways. So instead of calling to hijack your SMS from, or hijack your SIM from one of these telecom companies, you're really putting your stock in the security of your Gmail account. So if you have a good Gmail account, if you're a Gmail password, Google password, if you're using TOTP as an MFA to get into your Gmail account, then using something like Google Voice is less risk, less easy to exploit, I should say, than using SMS from a telco, but there's definitely similar risk there. Are you going to notice if somebody does get into your account somehow and changes your phone number, the termination phone number from Google Voice? Are you going to notice if they change that from your phone number to their phone number? So marginally better, but still I would only use that as a last resort.
So you would prefer, what about email versus SMS? Same thing as far as how your email is protected?
Same thing, yeah. As far as it really depends on how your email is protected. If I had to choose between email as a second factor and SMS as a second factor, I would choose email as a second factor.
Okay.
Just because I know that I have TOTP for my email. I know that my email is a randomized password. I know that my password manager has MFA on it as well, and a good strong password for that. So there's more layers, more complexity to get into that. And I don't have to depend on, somebody who's at the end of an 8-hour shift trying to help one last person before they go home switch their SIM over, which happens to be my SIM.
Gotcha. What does TOTP stand for again?
TOTP stands for time-based one-time password.
Okay,
so it's
gotcha.
essentially just the rolling 6-digit codes for multi-factor authentication.
Like the Google Authenticator.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Yep. All right. And so the most important question of the night is, what is your favorite hacking movie? Like we've got the nominees of course, Sneakers, the classic. And then we've got, of course, Swordfish. It's hard to compete with that. Or the movie Hackers from the 90s with Angelina Jolie. It's a very, it's a cult, classic. What do you think?
So, yeah, if I'm picking a movie only, that's another good one, The Net.
The Net, yes, with Sandra Bullock, yes.
Yeah. I personally love the more social side of hacking, the social engineering, the exploiting the human. I don't know if my wife likes that about me or not, probably not, but so I would say Sneakers. If we're talking about hacking, in depiction of hacking, you can't go wrong with the TV show Mr. Robot. Now, it's breaking the rules a bit, but it's definitely my favorite hacking show. But yeah, for movies, definitely Sneakers.
Very good, very good. All right, so now we will do the raffle and let everybody go. All right, so the winner, let's see, we've got 3 prizes, 2 JetBrains and 1 Agile Learner. So this is karma. The person who asked the most questions, Steve Afrin, wins the JetBrains license. I did this randomly. So Steve, fate has stepped in, and you win the license. Well done. The other winner for JetBrains is Stefan. He's got let's see, I think the last name, it's a utah.gov email address, and so I'll email you with that email address with the code, so that'll take care of that. And then the Agile Learner Prize, that is once again Venkat's online training where he does great videos. It's a great resource. That goes to Kevin Kundick. And so, Kevin, are you here? And you have to be present to win this one. Right here, Kevin. Just tap it in the chat, and you can win it. Oh no, is he here? Oh, someone else might win. He could watch this later and realize he missed out on the prize. Okay, 5 more seconds for Kevin to chime in, and then I'm going to choose another winner. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, what about Bill Gerard? Are you still here? Bill, all right. Bill is here. So, Bill, you win the Agile Learner Prize, and I will email that to you. All right. So, remember, next month is Venkat. So, third Thursday, we're going to have, he's amazing. And then the big question as far as when we'll be back in person, And of course, the big answer is don't know. It all depends on when the venues are comfortable having us back in. And someone asked Craig Larson, what was the hacker movie with the sword name in it? That was Swordfish with John Travolta, right? And Password Swordfish, I think it was. It was terrible. It had John Travolta and Hugh Jackman as the hero hacker. So that was just, wonderful. I'm saying that as a joke. It's very campy and terrible, and it's not good at all. All right, so that's it, everyone. See you next time. I appreciate you everyone staying and enjoying the whole presentation.